for me, trust is a base instinct that starts with a mother and a baby, but it's also interpersonal trust is a foundation of a prosperous society. It's tried and tested. The accountability between trust or a breach of trust between people is something that's been evolved over thousands of years. I think the challenge and the problem is applying that same principle or those same principles to a dry technology that has no accountability, or even a company selling that technology where the motivations are different, the accountability is different, and yet we seem to apply the same principles.
You're listening to KBcast, the cybersecurity podcast for all executives. Cutting through the jargon and hype to understand the landscape where risk and technology meet. Now, here's your host, Carissa Breen.
Mike, welcome to the show. I'm really happy to have you here today. I know we spoke a few weeks back and you had some interesting views on the industry, interesting views on how you see the industry evolving. So I'm really keen to get into that today. But before we do that, we always like to start our podcast off with talking about you and your journey. So please walk our listeners through where you started and what are you sort of doing now?
Sure. Well, thanks first of all for having me on the show. I guess I've been in love with technology since I was a kid. I used to program games at school, which went viral. I developed the software to manage our footy tipping competition and ended up making a career out of that. First, I worked at the University of Illinois in the US, where I led a team building a reporting system to measure the impact of educational programs across the state of 12 million people. Returned to Australia, worked for a digital agency for a year, had the full Mad Men experience, and swore I'd never work for an agency again. Left that business to start my own agency, which I did over the course of 10 years, eventually growing into a full services agency, and exited that business. But effectively, I'd been building enterprise digital systems and bringing them to market for my entire career. Following the sale of the business, joined forces with my current co-founder, Yuval Herzog. He's the former head of R&D in one of Israel's most prestigious cyber intelligence units. And he's also the architect of secure voice over IP, which we're communicating with today. And our first project together was building a data analytics platform that connected brands with consumers using connected health devices like Fitbits, smart blood pressure monitors, or even smart homes. And we were servicing the enterprise end of town. And we had this challenge of proving to them that even though we were a startup holding incredibly sensitive data, as a middleware, we could prove to them that even if we were breached, they wouldn't end up on the front page news. Kellogg's, I think, was the catalyst for us. And it was our solution for being able to demonstrate that we could get breached and the sensitive stuff wouldn't. That led us to establish Tide, which is where I am today, where we invented a new capability that unlocks a form of cyber herd immunity to make an organization resistant to the ravages of the inevitable breach.
Cyber herd immunity. I really like that. So talk to me a little bit more about that and what you mean by that.
Well, if you look at the state of affairs today, where we're seeing mass data breaches on a daily basis, we're seeing national infrastructure compromised, we're seeing supply chain attacks causing generational damage. The victims of those attacks range from government departments with near unlimited resources to large enterprises, small businesses, individuals. Everyone's copying it, and everyone's got a lot to lose. So the current approach clearly isn't working. So we've taken a different view where if you can, let's say, leverage the scale of the internet and the strength of a decentralized network, the security of a decentralized network, which is probably one of the only technologies that out in the wild has proven to be secure in the face of the most grandest of attacks. you can leverage those qualities to develop a technology that allows even the smallest player in the ecosystem to be protected by that same scale against any adversary.
Would you say that people are aware that the current approach isn't working, but then are sort of thinking, well, that's all I kind of got, and they just keep doing the same thing? Or do you believe that people aren't aware that the current approach isn't really working?
I would say as of recently, anyone that had their head buried in the sand is now aware. The conversation 3 years ago was very different. Even CISOs that we would speak to of large enterprises, the attitude was, well, you know what? Even if we get breached, we're in good company, and you could kind of sweep it under the rug. And the damage from those breaches wasn't really obvious. It wasn't really felt. Post COVID, I don't think that's the case. I think people are seeing that their ability to protect themselves despite record expenditure, trying to prevent those attacks, hasn't kept them safe, and so I think that attitude's changing.
So where do you think that shift sort of stemmed from? So you said in the last 3 years, the people who were burying their head in the sand, I agree, but now they've sort of changed. Was there anything that sort of spurred them to think differently? Like, yes, probably COVID plays a part in that, but this is even going back before COVID. Like, what was sort of the reasoning behind that from your perspective?
There's probably a few kind of key shifts in the sand. You look at the introduction of the GDPR in Europe that put a cost attached to privacy or breaching privacy. That there was we spoke at South by Southwest in 2019, and there was a measurable difference in the attitude from anyone from Europe versus those in the States. Since then, you've had the California Privacy Act appear, and then a whole host of other states following suit. So even just the notion of privacy is dead, introduced by Facebook, that attitude's changing, and we've seen, in the case of Facebook, we've seen a data breach result in election tampering in one of the biggest nations in the world. So people are seeing the impact of breaches and seeing the impact of, I guess, trusting a technology, or trusting a company that sells technology, and that's changed the attitude. And I'd say that pre-COVID was probably the precursor to this kind of shift in attitude.
Now, that's an interesting word that you use there, trust. So that's probably the main thing that I'd like to speak to you about today, because it's so interesting. Like, when we were talking, like, people talk about trust, and I mean, I remember working in the bank, and the CISO was like, we've got to engender trust, we've got to do this. But then, like, what does that actually mean? So we talk about trust, but I'm keen to hear your thoughts specifically on your definition of what this means to you.
Yeah, I think trust means a lot of things to a lot of people. For me, trust is a base instinct that starts with a mother and a baby, but it's also interpersonal trust is a foundation of a prosperous society. It's tried and tested. The accountability between trust, or a breach of trust between people, is something that's been evolved over thousands of years. I think the challenge and the problem is applying that same principle, or those same principles, to a dry technology that has no accountability, or even a company selling that technology where the motivations are different, the accountability is different, and yet we seem to apply the same principles.
And so I know you can't really speak on behalf of everyone else, but I'm keen to just get a bit of a read on, like, what do you think trust means to other people? Like, do you believe their definition aligns with yours? Or you did say that there are a myriad of different versions of what trust looks like, but I'm keen to sort of explore what that is.
Yeah, I think the notion of trust has definitely been tested post COVID, in particular. There was the kind of, I guess, the not just the tampering of elections, but questioning over whether elections in democracies can be relied upon, can be fair. there are, heaps of examples of different countries around the world trying to manage the COVID outbreak with tracing apps. And you could see, even though some of like Australia's one, for example, probably the most least invasive app on my phone, but they couldn't get critical mass of a population adopting it and using it because people don't trust the government with tracking them or with their data. And then you've seen, some of the most damaging breaches in history where you as a consumer shared your information with let's say a health provider, and then you became the victim of identity theft and had money stolen from your account. And there's kind of follow-on effects happening that I think previously weren't felt. And I think the attacks are getting more sophisticated, more brazen, and so I think the attitude towards trusting even a technology, if you look at instances like, for example, SolarWinds, where you've got a technology that was probably one of the most trusted pieces of software in an organization, and that trust being the very vulnerability that was exploited to kind of and caught everyone with their pants down.
So, would you say, from what I'm hearing and from what you're saying, is trust just an illusion? Because everyone talks about just trust me, and when people say that, or I trust this product or this person, and I think that there's always that underlying like feeling that you shouldn't trust that when someone says just trust me. So I'm keen to understand that, are people just saying it, but then there's no sort of genuineness there's no level of integrity there anymore? Are we all sort of just being, blind leading the blind here? I don't know.
Well, I think for me, it comes back to that notion of applying the same principles of trust between people, where let's say there is a breach of trust, there's a fairly well established accountability or punishment, and a person can't really change themselves. They're still the same person that has breached someone else's trust. So it becomes very much more difficult for them to do that again. Whereas a technology has no feelings. A company selling technology is motivated to maximize profits, to cut corners, to bring an MVP to market, and they're answerable to shareholders. But even the company itself, the people working in the company will turn over, the shareholders of the company will turn over. So you can close down a company, open up another one, even with the same technology, and so the accountability is quite different. But we seem to apply the same principles of trust there, which I think is problematic.
Would you say people's view of trust has changed significantly? And what I mean by that is, back in the day, you had your four major banks in Australia, for example. People were trusting one of them. Now that's changed. You've got digital banks, and people aren't trusting large banks anymore because of the Royal Commissioner and just how they've operated in the past. Or there's been a lot of like money laundering that's happened, I think, recently, that was in the news about people going to the ATMs and doing all this stuff. So do you think now people are sort of really on the back foot about it, and therefore this is what's really starting to ignite this conversation that we're having in the space?
Yeah, I think on a kind of macro level, we've seen a few big events like GFC, like back in 2008, I think it was, where a lot of established foundational organizations, which we kind of blindly relied upon, let us down, and people started to ask questions, and it saw the introduction of technologies like blockchain to counteract that. And so I think that the trust that was placed in some of those kind of base institutions that were relied upon as foundations has changed.
And would you say, because of the GFC, for example, that's been the start or the catalyst to start eroding that trust, for people to ask more questions than perhaps they did before? They probably just didn't really think twice about it, right? But now people are questioning that because of what's happening in the media, and because of what they've seen, and because companies have let them down.
And I think also, with technology as an enabler, it gives more power to communities that previously had real no real way to represent themselves in a meaningful way. But with social media and decentralized technologies have given a I guess the potential to kind of change the balance of power in a conversation, like whether it's finances or how someone's sensitive data is handled.
Mm. So when we did speak, you mentioned that people have to trust something. And sort of what you meant by that is people have to trust someone, something, some company, just something. So talk to me a little bit about this, because it's something that, yes, you do think you've got to trust someone or something, but then it's like, well, hang on, it starts to open up a bit of a can of worms around the questioning then that goes into trusting these people, these organizations.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at cybersecurity as an industry, everyone more or less has the same promise, the same value proposition on the box. We'll keep you secure. We're the most secure. Trust us. But it does usually mean that you have to put blind faith in that company, in that technology, in that software, which you don't have visibility to. So even if, let's say, you're encrypting your sensitive information, the question then becomes, okay, well, this information is inaccessible to someone who might get their hands on it, but where does the key to decrypt the data sit? Does that sit inside your application? Does that sit with your IT manager? Does that sit with a third party that manages those keys for you because you're not capable of doing it yourself? Wherever that key sits is where your trust is placed, and that becomes a point of vulnerability for you as an organization. And depending on where that sits, you're open to, I guess, a different risk, whether it's a human risk or a technology risk.
So do you think people are actually asking that question though? Like, do you think they're even thinking like that? Or it's like, okay, you've proven enough, company X, that you're trustworthy. That's it. That's enough. No questions asked.
I think supply chain attacks have really changed that attitude. Microsoft, SolarWinds, Kaseya, like a lot of these brands were the most trusted in the industry, and they were the software that kept your organization safe. So when they became the source of your vulnerability, it became pretty clear that you know you have to start asking those questions, and even a lot of the systems integrators that have cybersecurity managed services that we deal with, they recognize the fact that offering these services means that they are the central point of vulnerability. They're the central point of failure, and so they're looking at ways to make sure that they remove themselves as a risk in the way that they offer that service, which is very encouraging.
So I guess to just sort of press on that point a little bit more, that as we're talking about, like, yes, you have to trust something or someone, but there's still that room for vulnerabilities, as you just spoke about. And I think the thing is that people have flaws. They make mistakes, and people don't always act with integrity. It's been out in the media recently. There was I'm obviously not going to say the name, but there was a company that people did trust, but obviously the CFO did not act with integrity. And so therefore that is a byproduct of the vulnerability that's still left there, right? And then products and system have defects as well. So what do you think about this?
I think that historically, when we're talking about cybersecurity solutions, the security comes from obscurity. So there's a promise from a brand. Ideally, you're kind of a well-established brand that has a history of developing products that have been out in the market and tried and tested. And you're trusting the brand more than the technology, because generally you either don't have the expertise or you don't have the visibility. It's proprietary technology. You don't see the source code. You don't see how it works. There's no third party that's necessarily validated that is reliable. But there's a trend that's now offering much more visibility into how a solution works, so that the security comes from transparency or verifiable mathematics, or scrutiny, from almost like a crowdsourced audience that can verify the integrity of the security.
And so, how does that work?
Um, well, if you look at Bitcoin as an example, there's a technology where anyone can plug into this network and get the identical result, regardless of whether you know what side of the earth you're on. You know exactly how the system works, and it's the sanctity of the security comes from verifiable mathematics that everyone can look at, everyone can review, everyone can test, and so as a technology, it's proven to be pretty stable, and you don't need to trust anyone else in the network to trust that the store of value that your key accesses, for example, is sacrosanct.
And there's transparency there, right? Like people can see what's happening, um, and that's up to their discretion. If they want to go into the details, they can, but they don't have to, of course. And so, would you say that this is going to potentially stir up a lot of vendors out there? Because I mean, that's like people's crown jewels, right? They don't want to just offer that up, or how they do things, or it could be as well like trying to sweep things under the rug, so to speak.
I think temporarily you might see a bit of that, but I think, again, having seen some security companies themselves be breached, and that being really a catastrophic event for a company like that, the desire or the ability now to remove yourself as a central point of vulnerability is going to be, I think, more attractive than trying to protect IP. That gave you a temporary competitive edge in the market, but moving forward, you're going to need to adapt.
Would you say that people are starting to look at this moving forward, or do you still think people are stuck in their old ways of how they think, how they operate, what's happening today, the way I've always done it?
I think it depends on the size of an organization. I think small businesses really would struggle, regardless of their attitude, regardless of how well they train their staff. They're reliant on third parties, and they don't have the means to kind of really validate the technology. So they're really relying on the market to do that for them, or third party experts. And as the technologies and the solutions become more transparent, and accountable, and verifiable, then anyone using that technology, whether it's a small business without capabilities or resources, will benefit from it. So I think a lot of people, even with a desire, don't have a chance. But there are a lot more solutions being introduced to the market, a lot of new approaches that introduce this kind of openness and the verifiability, which is the key. And then the challenge becomes introducing something that is secure but also usable, doesn't introduce user friction. And so the better solutions have kind of cracked that nut.
The other thing that I think about, and I think I was speaking to someone the other week, Dustin Brewer. It was around the ISACA Emerging Technologies report that we went through. And I sort of asked him about when COVID came out, everyone went on the Zoom trend, but no one sort of really did any vendor analysis or any due diligence. And there were, of course, issues which they remediated for whatever reason, because they're obviously getting people backlash in the market, which I can understand. But then it sort of, my mind went to, well, did people just go to Zoom, for example, or any other technology vendor out there because everyone else did it? Do you think that then the industry is then relying trust then on what other people do? Like, okay, well, 70% of people went with this vendor, I'm just going to do it too. Do you think there's not enough independent thinking about, well, is this right for me and my organization, or am I just going to follow what everyone else does because most people have adopted this technology, for example?
Yeah, I think definitely a factor, and I think what kind of exacerbated that as a potential issue is the speed with which organizations needed to adapt to stay alive when everything when economies were shut down, when people had to work from home. The only solution for them was to take the path of least resistance to survive, and so due diligence went out the window, and following the crowd, it seemed like the safe thing to do.
So would you say that that was just an anomaly in that particular instance because people's backs are against the wall? Like, we're not going to sit there and do due diligence. Like, at this point, people didn't even know what was going to happen.
Yeah, I think people had very limited options, and even though video conferencing technology and the likes of Zoom or even Skype, it's been around for years, it all of a sudden became the only way to do business, and so there was no time to think.
But here's the thing that gets me still is speaking to a lot of people in the space that I do, a lot of them from the conversations that I have is they will just follow what other people are doing. I mean, I've seen this when I worked in the bank. If we bought a technology, the other three banks would follow. And so do you think there still needs to be that learning around, well, we can't just trust what the other guys do. We've got to sort of do DD for ourselves, and we've got to understand if this works for us. I still feel like there's that herd mentality because everyone's doing it, therefore it's okay because I trust what the others are doing.
Yeah, there's I guess the old notion of nobody got fired for using IBM Global Services or something along those lines. I forget the so yeah, that's certainly the case. But if you think about how and why that is a necessity for someone, it's because how else do you judge the quality of a product or a service when when it's a black box and you can't see inside it, or no one can see inside it, even if you don't have the expertise, you don't see, you can't see that there's been enough scrutiny from experts with a range of different motivations, not just ones that might support a particular vendor or organization.
So I guess it comes into probably like the line of questioning, or like when they're doing a demo or POC, like really getting into the specifics. So maybe they're just not going deep enough into it because they can't, because they are restricted at the end of the day. Would you say that that's the case?
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly if you put yourself in the shoes of a small business, you don't have that capability. Your expertise is in selling a particular service or widget. It's not technology. It's certainly not very niche technology. That's where even experts are struggling to keep organizations safe. So you really have no chance but to trust. But does that trust have to come from what someone's telling you, or can that trust come from the market where there's been plenty of external validation and eyeballs on something to test that it works?
I guess these guys don't know what they don't know, right? So that's like me going and, I don't know, asking about something I have no idea on. You don't even know where to start. You don't know what is good or not good. So I guess that'll probably be a bit more of a strain for those guys. But then, like you said, putting trust into what other people say. So the other thing I want to sort of speak to you about is all of this trust conversation. Do you believe we're just putting too much trust in others or other companies? And does that concern you?
Yeah, I think the risk for any organization in often trusting themselves when it comes to the human factor is problematic. Trusting third-party vendors or suppliers where they are a central point of failure for your entire business, or a central point of vulnerability if you're attacked, is massively problematic. And again, we're seeing more and more examples of those kind of attacks. So having to rely on a single vendor that is susceptible to a singular attack is problematic and is a risk to any organization.
what if we could remove trust? And this is where the conversation really gets interesting, because we've just spoken most of today's interview about trust, trusting someone, etc. So what do you mean by this? And then how does that work?
It comes back to, trusting what's on the box rather than what's in the box. Transparency through, let's say, open source code, and having complete scrutiny of a solution introduces a new level of accountability, or even verifiability of a solution. So there are, for example, you plug a node into a decentralized network, and you or someone can mathematically verify that you're getting the same output, the same result as anyone else in the network. So it becomes a solution that is verifiable. And I think that's the key, is when you can have verifiability of the integrity of a solution at any point in that solution, whether you're a consumer who's about to log into to internet banking. Is there a way for you to verify that I am actually logging into my bank? You can have an SSL certificate, but even that SSL certificate is trusting some kind of an authority that you don't have any visibility to. So introducing ways to be able to verify either as a consumer using a service, or as the organization, making sure that your security is sacrosanct.
So just say, for example, someone's like, cool, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to verify this, but then it doesn't do what they thought it was going to do. How does that conversation go?
Well, let's say, as a consumer about to log into internet banking, and there's a way for me to verify, even at a glance or at a click of a button, hey, am I truly about to log into my bank? And if the answer is no, something doesn't smell right, then I can change the way that I then interface with the bank, or I can not log into the bank using that machine. So it just gives you an option that you didn't have before because it's verifiable. But more than that, not expecting a typical consumer to have necessarily that capability or that wherewithal. The ability of maybe more savvy users to identify that there's an issue, and for that to be kind of shared, so that a vulnerability, because of the verifiability, a vulnerability can be identified and the damage can be mitigated because it's been picked up and shared.
So would you say this is definitely going to put more pressure back on vendors, suppliers, for example? I mean, it's not a bad thing, right? Like, we want people to be accountable. How do you think that's going to go?
I think it's an opportunity. If you can, as a vendor, show that your product is verifiable, show that you yourself are not a supply chain risk, then that's just a massive competitive advantage. And those that do that, I think will ultimately win in the current environment.
So on a very small sort of consumer scale, the way I'm looking at it in my head, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there are certain platforms and it's like verified buyer, and they've got like 5 stars and they've got all these reviews. You're more inclined to go with that supplier than someone who doesn't have that. Is that sort of the same mindset mentality that people are going to have?
Yeah, I would say beyond that, because even I think people have come to struggle with trusting the guys that do those professional reviews, like the research companies, that, because you can buy a review effectively and any cybersecurity company that's looking to scale has one on their website. So it has to be, I would open to more community scrutiny, if you can call it that.
Sure.
And I think that's where the real transparency and accountability can go to strengthening security.
So there are organizations out there, Mike, that are sort of doing this in terms of endorsing or not endorsing a product. What do you think about those guys? would you say that people still trust what they have to say, or would you say that's sort of dissipating now?
I would say, to a degree, and it's maybe to date been the least worst option available. Um, accreditation is one way to build trust when you can't prove it. But it, as we're seeing in kind of this the breach pandemic that we're living through at the moment, it doesn't necessarily keep you safe.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I guess because there's not really being sort of an alternative solution, as you alluded to before, around the community or that crowdsourced sort of response to a product, for example. So, would you say the more and more that comes into effect, the other companies out there or these non-verified reviews become sort of a bit of a distant memory? Would you say, or
I can kind of see them evolving and taking on a slightly different role in maybe in that community setting. But yeah, you shouldn't have to rely on the 5 stars from a process that again you've got no visibility to. Um, but but there'll be opportunities for those services. I think in a more transparent and accountable world, I think it'll just create um, a bigger industry for that.
so would you say that trust will sort of become redundant in the future? And what I mean by that is because we've got ways to validate, verify. Therefore, we don't need that. Doesn't even need to have a conversation. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to close my eyes and jump out the window and hope that I live. Like, there's a little bit more sort of infrastructure. There's a little bit more process around to actually validate products and services, for example.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I think what we replacing the need for blind faith with verifiability introduces a new level of trust. If you could trust that sharing your information with, your digital health record, and you've seen multiple attempts from the Australian government to create a digital health record, which makes a lot of sense in terms of offering affordable healthcare for the nation and having all of your health data in one place so that it can be shared with specialists, and you can improve your own healthcare and that of your family. But today you've got no visibility, certainly no reassurance when you're seeing multiple government services caught up in the next breach that your information is safe or that you know what's being done with that information. If you could replace the need to have blind faith in that solution with that verifiability, then the focus is now on the value add of the service itself, not whether your information is secure or whether you can trust the security of the system. So you can then the health platforms then really just focus on delivering that value of a health product rather than a security product.
So, two questions. Australia as a whole, including like general public, what percentage, I mean, this is a very abstract out there question, I'm just keen to hear like how you interpret this. What percentage would you say that I just have that blind faith in terms of everyone in Australia that are trusting like my health record and all of these things? Would you say, like, as a guess?
I'd say the very low. Because of the research that I do, I get retargeted a lot by the health department and those responsible for kind of creating those services. And if you just look at the comments from people on social media to the ads that are telling you how safe and in control you are of your information, I think that's some kind of a measure. But again, if you go back to Australia's attempt for a COVID tracing app, which had the potential to, keep us out of lockdown and keep the economy open, there's a massive benefit to, to citizens of the country if there was participation. But after spending a fortune developing a solution, there was an even bigger fortune spent trying to market it without the ability to get critical mass. So I'd say the trust levels are pretty low. And I think even when it comes to the digital health record, unlike the requirement for a business to have people opt in, you were automatically opt-in, and people had to go to the effort of opting out, and I think that happened in droves. So there is definitely a real challenge there and that trust problem is being felt now in the market.
So would you say less than 30%? 20, 10, 5?
Not sure if I could put a number on it, but I'd certainly say it's low.
Yeah. What about in the industry, though? Do you think that people still have this blind faith? If we sort of zoom into the security or even the tech industry, do you think there's still a lot of that happens?
Yeah, I would say that people are certainly more aware of the challenges with trusting traditional vendors that to date, were the most solid names in the industry, and they were the ones that you couldn't get fired for engaging with. But it's more a matter of what are my other options, and kind of hanging on for dear life in the face of cyber attacks from nation states that have near unlimited resources to attack you. So it's quite a challenge.
So just on that note, would you say that there's a bit of an opportunity now for startups because people aren't trusting the big players as much as they historically they did, for example? Because people are looking at alternative solutions that may be better, that may be a tenth of the price, for example, and they're not sort of so headstrong on, I need to have this vendor, so to speak. Do you think that's an opportunity? And then also, at a very high level, what do you think the criteria is for people in trusting a company at the moment?
I think this kind of post-COVID world has really created a lot of seismic shifts that are basically opportunities for new players to challenge the incumbents, both in cybersecurity and really everywhere. And startups, can definitely capitalize on that. And I think in terms of criteria for trust, it becomes a matter of transparency and accountability, and then things beyond that, like for example, how does a company behave when their customer or the interest of their customer is at odds with profitability? How do they behave in those scenarios? Are they exploitative? Do they take advantage of that situation, or are they benevolent? And I think that's another way to kind of measure trust beyond the technological sense.
Now, ultimately, vendors are relying on customers to trust them, and they need that for repeat business or to continue working with them as a service or project or whatever it may be. What do you think the landscape of this is going to look like? Is it going to become harder? Because, I mean, I know I've worked in large corporations before. Vendor rolls up, cool. I mean, this has gone back, 8-10 years ago, when you'd have a large vendor and they know that they're going to get another 3-year contract. But there was no real sort of any scrutiny or criticism towards them. Is like, yep, I know exactly I'm going to get this signed off and I'm safe for 3 years. Do you think this is really going to change the game now? Is it not going to be as easy as that? People really have to prove themselves now. It's going to be a harder slog, so to speak.
Yeah, I would say even the way that business is done on the big end of town, when you're confined to working from home, there's no whining and dining. So what then does an organization have for its own people to choose a vendor? So it definitely changes the nature of the game, and I think people will look for other things to assess whether someone's right for them. I think it creates, as I said, like lots of opportunities for the challenger brands.
Absolutely. It's always about finding that opportunity. I think now's the time. So, Mike, I really, really, really appreciate your time today. This has been such an interesting topic because people often do speak about it, but I was just like, well, what does that actually mean? So I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your knowledge today. If people perhaps have a question for you that I didn't ask you today, how can they go about getting in contact with you?
Yeah, sure. You can hit me up, Michael, at tide.org. And happy to answer any questions. And appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. Okay. Well, absolutely. And I can't wait to get you back.
Thanks a lot, Chrissa.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope that you found today's episode useful and you took away a few key points. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to get our latest episodes. If you'd like to find out how KBI can help grow your cyber business, then please head over to kbi.digital.
This podcast was brought to you by KBI.media, the voice of cyber.